Good afternoon. We are in week 2 out of 150 in a new series on the Psalms. You won't be laughing by next week or next year or the... Actually, you're students. You'll have graduated and gone before you've even finished this. No, I'm kidding. We're doing 8 weeks on the book of Psalms. Psalms is a series of songs that were compiled and used for worship. And I think really they express many, if not all, of the emotions that make up the human experience. And the reason we're looking at this book is we think they provide a helpful model for how we can take our emotions and our experiences, whatever we feel, whether they are good or bad, and turn them back into praise to God. And so over this 8-week series, we're going to look at a number of different emotions, themes like fear, loss, longing, anger, and some happy ones as well. And we're going to think about how we can use those to fuel our relationship with God and our spiritual lives. And today I want to look at an emotion that's kind of, I guess, fundamental or foundational to a whole load of the Psalms in this book. And it has to do with mankind's disposition towards God and life and the world. And that's a disposition I would describe as wonder. Wonder. A sense of radical amazement, of curiosity, of awe. And in an age like ours, actually it strikes me that the theme of wonder is one we often kind of dismiss as sort of primitive. You know, we live in an age where we know more about things than previous generations did, or at least we have more knowledge available to us at the click of a button at our fingertips. And it can be very easy for us to think with reason and understanding and all the knowledge we have, actually there's no place in our lives for wonder anymore. I don't think that should necessarily be the case. Actually, I think when reason or understanding and wonder work best together, they should fuel and feed one another and keep each other in tension. Actually, Plato said this: philosophy begins in wonder. This sense of looking at the world and thinking, wow, there's so much I don't know, and then applying your mind and thinking, philosophizing, reasoning about it. That's the way that wonder and philosophy should work together. But it's not simply the case that you wonder and then you think about it, then you got the answers, there's no place for wonder anymore. Actually, I think there should be a perpetual relationship between thinking and wonder. So Aristotle put it like this: it was their wonder and astonishment that first led men to philosophize and still leads them. There should be, in our lives, an interplay between wonder and reason, between wanting to know more, learning more, and still being amazed at everything around us that we know and do not know. Do you have space in your life for wonder? We can also, I think, sometimes assume that science has done away with the need for wonder. We feel like we know so much more about the universe, about the way things work. It can be very easy to think, well, actually, there's no space for questions anymore because we have so many of the answers. Again, I just don't think that is necessarily the case. And I've read tons and tons of accounts of scientists, both those who have a faith and those who have no faith, who express something really compelling about how wonder works in their scientific endeavors. And the more they learn about the world, not the less wonder they get, the more wonder they get, because they realize just how much there is to be amazed at. I read this snippet of a book by Rachel Carson, who is a conservationist and a writer whose writing was instrumental in kickstarting the environmentalist movement in the 50s and 60s. And she wrote this book called A Sense of Wonder, where she describes how her view of the world and the sense of wonder and her scientific endeavors go hand in hand. She puts it beautifully. She says, a child's world is fresh and new and beautiful, full of wonder and excitement. It is our misfortune that for most of us, that clear-eyed vision, that true instinct for what is beautiful and awe-inspiring is dimmed and even lost before we reach adulthood. She writes about the need to keep wonder alive, and she continues saying, what is the value of preserving and strengthening this sense of awe and wonder? This recognition of something beyond the boundaries of human existence? Is the exploration of the natural world just a pleasant way to pass the golden hours of childhood, or is there something deeper? I am sure there is something much deeper, she says, something lasting and significant. Those who dwell as scientists or laymen among the beauties and mysteries of the earth are never alone or weary of life. Whatever the vexation or concerns of their personal lives, their thoughts can find paths that lead to inner contentment and to renewed excitement in living. Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts. I love that quote. Wonder is a powerful thing. And whether you're here today as someone who believes in God, or maybe you have questions about God, or maybe you definitely don't believe in God, I would put it to you that there is great value in learning to cultivate wonder in our lives, keeping that sense of awe and excitement and constant curiosity alive. It's a nourishing thing to wonder. And I want to look today at Psalm 8, which is one of the psalms in which David expresses wonder at creation. Actually, wonder comes through a whole load of the different psalms in different ways. Sometimes the psalmist thinks about the acts that God has done, the ways he's intervened in history, and that causes him to wonder. Sometimes the psalmist reflects on the knowledge of God or the abilities of God. Psalm 139, for example, marvels and wonders at the fact that God knows how many hairs are on our heads, and he knows every thought before we know our thoughts. He knows when we stand up, when we sit down. He knows the words before they appear on our tongue. These are causes for wonder. But in the psalm that we're going to look at today, it's specifically about looking at the world, looking at creation, and being blown away by it that the psalmist is dwelling on. So we're going to read Psalm 8 and draw out a couple of thoughts about it. It'll come up on the screen behind me. This is Psalm 8, a psalm of David. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds, and the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. If I were to summarize Psalm 8 in one sentence, I would put it like this. Psalm 8 teaches us to wonder like a child and rule like a king. Psalm 8 teaches us to wonder like a child and rule like a king. Let me explain that a bit. The psalmist begins by looking at creation. He looks at the works of God's hands, the sun, the moon, the stars, and he is blown away by how they speak of his glory. But I think in particular, as he looks at these things that are above us that are just so huge, he gets this sense of how tiny he is in comparison. He talks about how incredible creation is, and he becomes acutely aware of how enormous and complex this universe is. And then he's moved to wonder at the mindfulness of God towards us. So he talks about creation and then says, what is man that you are mindful of him? Creation has a way of making us feel pretty small at times, doesn't it? I don't know if you've experienced this. There have been moments where I've been looking at a beautiful scene or looking up at the stars in the sky, and I just get blown away about how much bigger these things are than me. Creation has a way of making us feel small. The astronomer Carl Sagan wrote in his book, The Varieties of Scientific Experience, about this very phenomenon. He says this: many religions have attempted to make statues of their gods very large, and the idea, I suppose, is to make us feel small. But if that's their purpose, they can keep their paltry icons. We need only look up if we wish to feel small. It's after an exercise such as this that many people conclude that the religious sensibility is inevitable. He says, if we want to feel small, if we want to understand just how minuscule we are in comparison to the world, we don't need to look at icons and statues. Look up. The sky will do the trick. And he says it's inevitable that when you do that, at times you'll be moved to think about religious questions. I think many of us find that to be the case. I don't know if you saw the show over Christmas with Stephen Fry and Bear Grylls. Anyone see that? A few of you, yeah, okay. It was on Channel 4, and Stephen Fry spent a whole weekend with Bear Grylls climbing up mountains and hanging off helicopters and sort of abseiling down waterfalls and all sorts of stuff he really wasn't in good enough shape to do, and he looked terrified most of the program, which was hilarious. But there was this beautiful moment where they're sitting on top of this mountain and looking out over incredible landscapes. And Stephen Fry, who is a self-confessed atheist and humanist, and Bear Grylls, who is a Christian, they start talking about their different views of the world and life and God and what really matters. And Stephen Fry, having expressed that he doesn't believe in a God and he's an intelligent guy and he's really thought this through, he did admit this. I suppose there's a danger of getting very pretentious when you're in a vast landscape like this, because it does make you think. All the imponderable questions come tumbling into your mind, don't they? Wonder spurs us to ask the imponderable questions. And I imagine that many of us, if not all of us, have at least at some point found ourselves looking at something big in this world and thinking, is there something more? Now, I know that many of us will come to very different answers to that question. But I think it is an almost universal human experience at some point to look at the stars, to look at the world and to think, is there something more? Now, I don't have time today, sadly, to argue for the fact that I think there is something more. This is something I've thought about over many years, and I stand here today as someone who is happily convinced there is something more, there is a God. But if that is a question you are asking, I highly recommend the Alpha course, which Andy spoke about earlier. It's a brilliant, brilliant opportunity and environment to ask some of those questions. And in particular, do come along to the evening with Dr. Ard Louis, who will talk about the relationship between science and faith. It will be a fantastic evening. But I think that for many of us, we have those moments where we look at the stars, we look at creation, and we at least contemplate the idea that there may be a God. There may be something more. See, space is pretty big, to put it sort of fairly obviously. In fact, Douglas Adams, author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and master of the understatement, said this: space is big, really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemist, but that is just peanuts compared to space. I think his point is that space is big. It's pretty big. There are over 400 billion stars in our galaxy alone. I don't know who counted that. Give or take a few billion, I guess. 400 billion stars in our galaxy alone. If you've read papers this week, you'll see that scientists have claimed this week to have been able to map the universe to within 1% accuracy, far more accurate than ever before. And they have suggested that there are at least 1.2 million galaxies in the universe. 400 billion stars in our galaxy. 1.2 million galaxies in the universe. I'll let you do the maths. Space is big. And let me give you an idea of the sort of distances that spans. 1 light year, the distance that light travels in a year, is the equivalent of 5.9 trillion miles. That's a long way. And let me give you an idea of the speed that light travels. If you were to imagine light setting off and traveling around the Earth, it would orbit the Earth 7 times every second. That's pretty fast. Imagine that, like stretched out in a line for a whole year. A light year, 5.9 trillion miles, that's a long way. If you were to set off, I'm not suggesting you do, if you were to set off and try and walk a light year, it would take you quite some time. At an average pace, without ever stopping to eat or go to the toilet or any of the other things you might stop to do, it would take you 225 million years to complete your journey. That's a long way, and who's got time for that? Some of you students probably have time for that. Let me put this in material terms before I lose you all entirely. The average pair of shoes takes 500 miles to wear out. If you were to walk a light year, you would need 11.8 billion pairs of shoes. The average human manages to burn 80 calories per mile walked, which means you would need to carry with you and eat about 2 trillion energy bars. In short, don't try this at home. Space is big. How minuscule does that make you feel? Let me put this in terms of distances. Say you were to set out on your nice little ramble for a light year. It wouldn't be long before you would reach the sun. The sun is less than a light year away. In fact, it's considerably less than a light year away. The light that leaves the sun takes 8 minutes and 19 seconds to reach the Earth. So comparatively shortly into your light year's walk, you would pass the sun. And then you'd be pretty disappointed from then on, to be honest, because you would not reach the next closest star for another 4.22 light years. Space is huge. In fact, scientists this week have claimed to have been able to map the universe to 6 billion light years away. How absolutely minuscule does that make you feel? No wonder the psalmist says, I look up at the sky, I look at the sun and the moon and the stars, and I just think, what is man that you are mindful? I'm just living on this tiny speck of the universe. I'm the most insignificant tiny little bit of this enormous complex creation. What is mankind that you're mindful of me, of us? That you care about us? It is mind mind-blowing stuff. And the psalmist is just blown away by it, full of awe and wonder at the fact that God not only created and sustains that, but he also knows about and cares about each one of us. What an incredible reason for wonder. And the psalmist is just so deeply aware of his smallness and God's comparative bigness that he speaks of it in kind of childlike terms. He recognizes there is a certain childlike awe to viewing the world. He says this, verse 2. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. The psalmist recognizes this kind of childlike nature of awe. There is a certain humility, I think, that accompanies wonder. And he contrasts a child on the one hand and an adult on the other. In fact, not just a child and an adult, but a really weak, sort of young infant on the one hand, and a fully grown adult, a warrior, a foe, an avenger on the other hand. And he says, actually, the kid's way of seeing the world is probably more accurate than the grown man who thinks he is strong and self-sufficient. Now remember who is writing this psalm. This is not the poetic work of a 3-year-old child prodigy. This is a king. This is a fully grown man. This is King David, who ruled over the nation of Israel. He had power and wealth and armies at his fingertips. And he says, actually, I think probably a kid's way of seeing the world is more profound and poignant than mine. There is a sense of childlike awe that we should feel towards God and his creation. The psalmist implores us, wonder like a child. Children are amazing things. Some of them. All of them are amazing things. I don't yet have children, but I love hanging out with my friends who do, and I am constantly blown away by how children have this amazing capacity to take delight in things I just find boring. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? You spend time with these kids and they just do the same things over and over. And I just think that's dull. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. And you go around and you play with these children and they're putting blocks on top of each other. And you think, that's the same thing you did last time I was here. How are you still finding that fun? I'm like, give me the next thing. Let's move. Or you play catch with them. I don't mean with them. I mean with the ball. And I've got a lot to learn. You throw the ball to the child and they catch this thing and they just explode with enthusiasm as if they've just done the most amazing thing ever. And I'm like, you caught a ball. Okay. But you kind of applaud them. Well done, and throw it back to me, and it goes nowhere near you, and you can pick it up, and you throw it to them again, and they catch it, and just explode with amazement, as if, again, it's the most miraculous thing, and it's the same thing you did a second ago, okay, haven't you got bored of this yet? And they keep doing it like 20 minutes, and eventually you're like, okay, next game, anything else? And they're like, again. I think, how do you have that capacity for just amazement at monotony? I don't understand it. But actually, G.K. Chesterton, who's one of my favorite writers, in his book Orthodoxy, he says, actually, that is a very profound thing. That children do not get tired of repetition. And he said, actually, if you reflect on that a little bit, you may well find that that tells us something very profound about the character of God. He says, if you observe the world, you'll find that it is full of repetition. The sun rises and sets. The stars come out in the sky, planets move, seasons come and go, leaves grow and drop. We see routine everywhere in the world. And for us, particularly with our scientific bent or our scientific mind, we can tend to get rather blasé about the routines in the world. Actually, he says maybe routine tells us something profound about the delight of God. He puts it like this. A child kicks his legs rhythmically through excess, not absence of life. Because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free. Therefore, they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, do it again. And the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead, which I'm sure parents can really understand. For grown-up people, he says, are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun. And every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. The repetition in nature may not be mere recurrence. It may be a theatrical encore. Heaven may encore the bird who laid an egg. I just love that way of putting it. So beautiful and poetic. Have you ever thought about the delight of God? When you find yourself feeling tired of life, just getting used to the way things work. Have you ever thought that maybe God still delights in the routines, in the seasons, in the things that we just get blasé about? Have you ever thought that maybe God throws the sun up like a ball every morning? Or that when it sets in the evening, he might be like the child that catches it, burst out with excitement, having done it for the millionth time, but enjoying it as if it were the first? Have you ever thought about the delight and wonder and awe that God himself may feel? Now, of course, we understand that God doesn't actually throw the sun up in the air like a ball. We know that he's not sitting in a workshop making daisies, all of them exactly the same. But I would put it to you that we should not allow our understanding of science and the way the solar system works and all those things which are good to quash our sense of wonder at the world. This world is an incredible place, and it should move us to awe. As the Jewish philosopher Abraham Heschel puts it, we know how nature acts, but not why and for whose sake. We know that we live, but not why and wherefore. In other words, knowing that how the universe works shouldn't stop us from being amazed that it works. Knowing how the universe works shouldn't stop us being amazed that it works. There is so much to be regularly astounded out of this world if we allow ourselves to wonder. So the psalmist says, wonder like a child. And the reason? Because if you wonder like a child, you may well be experiencing something very close to the heart of God. Wonder like a child. There's this sad passage in Matthew chapter 21 where Jesus is in the temple and he actually quotes this psalm, Psalm 8 verse 2. I read the passage. It says, the blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple courts, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. Do you hear what these children are saying? They asked him. Yes, replied Jesus. Have you never read? And then he quotes Psalm 8:2. From the lips of children and infants, you, Lord, have called forth your praise. Jesus is healing people. There are sick people in the temple of all places. You know, the place where you should be able to get away with doing some religious stuff. And Jesus is there, and the sick people are coming, and he's healing them. And the kids are singing and just going crazy with excitement. And they're screaming, Hosanna to the Son of David, which means they recognize who Jesus was, the Son of David, the king they'd been waiting for centuries and centuries. And they scream out, Hosanna, which means save us. So the kids are looking at this. There's miracles happening. They're recognizing something about God and his character and what he's about, and they're just so excited. And the chief priests look at it a bit indignantly and say to Jesus, you see what these kids are doing? You know, getting all excited about these miracle things. And Jesus quotes Psalm 8. He says, yeah. Don't you know Psalm 8, verse 2? From the mouths of infants, Lord, you have called out your praise. And he doesn't quote the second half of Psalm 8, verse 2. I don't think he needs to. I think it's implicit there. He's saying, do you remember how that psalm goes? From the lips of infants, Lord, you will silence your foes, your enemies. I think Jesus is saying in a kind of cutting but subtle way, who are you, chief priest? Who are you in this picture? The kids are seeing things the way they are. The kids have a good, accurate understanding of this world and the miracles I'm about. I think you're in danger of missing out here. The chief priest was so indignant at the expression of awe and wonder that the children were declaring that they just turned their nose at it and they failed to recognize what God was doing. And the reason I find that passage so sad is because, to be honest, I find that often I'm probably a little more like the chief priest and a little less like the kids. You know what I mean? I think sometimes I'm more like the chief priest. This world is incredible. So many things happen every day for which I should be incredibly, exceedingly thankful. And I can just miss them because I'm just tired of life at times, or just so focused on being orderly or proper or whatever. And so I fail to recognize the gifts that I receive every day. Life and breath, health, love, family, friends. I don't deserve those things. They're gifts. They're miracles. We have sinned and grown old, said Chesterton, and our Father is younger than I. I complain when the world doesn't work the way I want it to. I barely notice when it works the same every day. I was on a station the other week, just waiting for a train. I looked down the track. It was an absolutely beautiful sunset right at the end of the track. You know what I thought as soon as I saw that? I'll give you a clue. I didn't think, oh Lord, you have set your glory above the heavens. Your majesty fills the earth. I thought, that looked great on Instagram. If I just apply the right filter, I might make God's creation look perfect. You know? And as I found myself looking through this little screen, I suddenly thought, yeah, that's stupid. I feel a bit like the chief priests and not enough like the kids. Wonder like a child. Because in so doing, you may experience something very close to the heart of God. The application of this talk is not especially profound. It's quite simple. Look up from time to time. I don't mean now. You won't see any stars now. Look up from time to time. Look around. Observe the world. Take time to look at things about you. If you're anything like me, you can spend so much time just looking down at things, reading or phone or whatever. Take time to look up. Be amazed at the world. Don't get tired of the routines and the cycles and the repetition in the world. Ask yourself, why is it that these things happen day in, day out, day in, day out? Don't just ask how do things work. Ask why they work. Why they work that way, and what kind of being would create the world to work in that particular way. Be insatiably curious is my application to you. In fact, that's my 2014 New Year's resolution. I'm going to be insatiably curious. I'm going to ask questions about as much as I possibly can in 2014 because I want to explore and know more about this world. What is it that really piques your curiosity? What are the things that get you really excited and make you awestruck or full of wonder? They may well be different for each of us. Why not prioritize curiosity in 2014? If it's time spent outside, why not look at your diary and figure out how can I maximize my time spent out in creation, being blown away by the wonders of God? If it's listening to music, find time to do that. If it's reading books that stretch the horizons of your thought, find time in your diary to do that. If it's traveling, find time in your budget and your diary to do that. Find out what it is that piques your curiosity and keeps your hunger for more, your hunger for knowledge, your hunger for awe and wonder alive, and prioritize it in 2014. Be insatiably curious. And here's a tip. When you learn new things about the world or about life or about God, don't just chalk that up as, oh, that's something new I've learned today. So easy to do. Learn to turn it back in praise towards God. If the Psalms teaches anything, it's that emotions are not just things we kind of recognize and then just leave on the shelf. Actually, they can all be turned back round in praise to God. So as Andy said last week, learn to chew over things, meditate on things, and then turn them back to God. Say, oh God, I didn't understand. That's why the world worked like it did. Now I've got that knowledge. That's amazing because that tells me something new about you. I'm thankful for that. Learn to let the things that you discover in 2014 become part of your worship life and your prayer life. Be insatiably curious. Psalm 8 teaches us to wonder like a child, but also I think it teaches us this. We are not only to wonder like a child, but to rule like a king. Verse 4. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. See, the psalmist is going on a journey of wonder. He starts off by looking at creation and going, wow, that tells me so much about my God. And then he realizes just how small and childlike he is in comparison. And he thinks, wow, given that this world is so complex, what is man that you're mindful of him? It's mind-blowing, God, that you even think about me, let alone care about me. And then thirdly, he actually starts to think, well, what does this care? What does this mindfulness of God towards humanity look like? And his mind goes back, I think, to Genesis chapter 1. And the language the psalmist uses about ruling over the skies and the seas and the wild animals is really reflective of what it says in the creation account of Genesis 1, where it describes God making everything. And at every point, he makes the sun and the moon. He says, this is good, this is good, this is good. He gets to the pinnacle of his creation, mankind, male and female. He says, this is very good. And in Genesis 1, it describes the creation like this. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Mankind, male and female, were created with a sense of dignity and purpose. When God thinks about us and cares about us, it's not a condescending thing like one might care for a pet. There is a sense of glory and honor about it. Why? Because we're made in his image. So where does that glory and honor come from? Well, it comes from him. We get a bit of his glory and honor. And that word image, well, I think it means a whole load of things that we won't go into now, but it means at least this. We were designed to somehow look like God, which is why he says in his image we were made, in his likeness. We were meant to somehow look like God, in particular in our care for and cultivation of the world, to bring order and beauty out of it, to subdue the chaos, and to bring out the good. And in so doing, we actually bear God's image and do the kind of curating work he himself would do of this world. So the psalmist's wonder just grows minute by minute. Not only is creation incredible, huge, and me very tiny in comparison, but actually God is mindful of me. Not only is he mindful of me, it's like he takes this creation and he says, okay, you bear my image. You'll somehow like me. And so I take this thing that is so precious to me and I hand it to you and I say, see what you can do with it. Go on. See what beauty you can bring out of this world. See what order you can create. I've called you to wander like a child, but rule like a king. I remember when I was younger, about say 12, 13, I think. I was in an old church in the countryside. I had a couple of hours to kill and was just sitting there, and there was a piano in the corner, no one else around. So I went up to this grand piano and I just decided to start playing on it, and nothing profound, nothing beautiful, I don't think, just whatever came into my head at the time. And I was just playing away, and suddenly I was aware that there was a lady in the church as well, and she snuck in without me noticing, crafty old lady. And so she sort of came up towards me. I mean, she was welcome to be there, but I stopped playing. I just suddenly felt a bit embarrassed. And so she came up towards me, and I was sitting there, and I was like, a bit apologetic. She said, no, don't worry about it. Keep playing. I just wondered if you happen to know who this piano belonged to, which struck me as a slightly stupid question, as if someone had just dropped it there by accident. Surely it belongs to the church, I said. And she said, no, before the church. Actually, this piano, she told me, it belonged to Noel Coward, who you may not know, he's a well-respected musician and playwright. He wrote over 50 plays, 12 musicals, hundreds and hundreds of songs. And she told me that actually they had documents that showed that he had written some of his most famous pieces of music on this piano, and that it had been donated to the church after his death. And so she said, well, carry on playing. Don't worry, don't mind me. And so I did. I sat down and I went back to playing. And to be honest, I'm not the biggest Noel Coward fan in the world, but I kind of just felt a sense of, reverence towards that piano that I didn't have before, because I know he's achieved so much. He's done so many incredible things and created so much incredible music. And so as my fingers returned to the keys, I guess I can only describe what I sort of felt was a slightly odd sense of me owing him something. It may sound weird, but I felt like I couldn't just go back to, playing chopsticks or whatever it was. I felt like I needed to do something more reverent, more full of awe. I kind of felt a sense of reverence and awe towards that instrument that I hadn't before, because I just thought it was like he had said, okay, this is my prized possession. I've done so many beautiful things with this piano, but now I entrust it to you. See what you can do. See what beautiful music you can play with this instrument. And so as I sat there and started to play again, I found I did so far more thoughtfully, far more reverently, and hopefully far more beautifully as well. Wonder does that to you. It makes you approach things in a slightly different way. The psalmist says, what is mankind that you are mindful of us? I mean, given everything else you've got under your control, God, what is mankind that you are mindful of us? Not even just mindful as in we're there, you care for us. In fact, you don't just care for us like you provide for us scraps here and there. Actually, you've made us a little lower than the angels. I mean, in the pecking order, that's pretty high up. And you've crowned us with glory and honor. Your glory and honor. You've given a bit of that to us. And you've given us this world, and you've made us, who are just minuscule specks on a tiny little bit of this universe, you've made us rulers. And you've said, here you go. See what you can do with this world. Wander like a child. Rule like a king. When you learn to think like that, you allow a sense of wonder to pervade everything you do. It changes the way you approach life. Because work is no longer just about doing enough to earn some more to survive another week. It's an opportunity to cultivate the little bit of the world that God has placed you in. When you learn to think with that sense of wonder, childlike awe pervading everything, actually the way we live, the communities we build, the way we serve our neighborhoods, the way we raise families, the way we create art, the attitudes we adopt, the tone we take when we speak to people, are all ways of saying, I want to bring some good out of this world. As one who was created with glory and honor, a little lower than the angels, designed to create and cultivate on behalf of my God. Wonder like children, rule like kings.